The House of Reps today passed the revised 2020 budget of 10.8 trillion naira, including the $5 billion foreign loan request from President Muhammadu Buhari. And the University of Ibadan today says Governor of Edo State, Governor Obaseki of the APC, graduated from the institution amidst the controversies over his certificate. Tonight, we'll speak with one of the aspirants in the APC governorship primary race. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the program. This is Politics Today, live on Channels Television. I'm Sean Kimbaloye in Lagos. It's the midweek edition of the program, and so it's a 1 hour stretch of the show. So let's get you started with some of the juices and the interesting stories that we have for you, politically speaking, of course. Amidst the controversies over the certificate of Governor Godwin Obaseki of Edo State, the management of the University of Ibadan today confirmed that the governor of Edo State graduated from the institution. The registrar of the university, Olubunmi Faluyi, in a statement says the governor attended and graduated from the institution where he studied classics. The institution says that, quote, Obaseki gained admission to the university in 1976 and graduated in 1979 with a second-class honors lower division. The university went further that the records of his admission and graduation are intact in the archives of the university. There's been a lawsuit over the matter where the governor insists he graduated from the institution. All right, and let's tell you about the public hearing over the Infectious Diseases Bill, which held today in Abuja. Loads and loads of controversies about that bill, where the chairman of the Nigeria's Governors Forum at that public hearing picked holes in the bill, which is currently being discussed, which was discussed at the public hearing, where representatives and of civil society organization also spoke. The bill is aimed at replacing the Quarantine Act. Dr. Kade Fayemi, who is the governor of Ekiti State, says the bill confers overwhelming powers on the NCDC DG.
For us at the Nigerian Governors Forum, our position is that any disease with significant threat to public health that will require authorizing measures that may potentially infringe or otherwise reserve human liberties, the proposed measures must take into account a number of ethical considerations balancing public health against human rights. The bill takes away the only authority the governors have to take specific steps and measures in their domains during an outbreak of an infectious disease. A situation where state governors do not have any power to make regulations in their state in the event of an outbreak of an infectious disease or to declare any part of the state an infectious area is not only inimical to the country's federalism, but also a recipe for disaster which cannot be managed by NCDC. This bill appears to vest overbearing discretionary powers on the Director General of the Nigerian Center for Disease Control. So for us, we believe that there are a number of provisions in the bill that must be reviewed.
Well then, the House of Representatives has passed the revised 2020 appropriations bill, raising the national budget from the proposed 10.5 trillion naira to 10.8 trillion. Although the committees on appropriations and finance, whose report was considered and adopted at plenary today, recommended 10.8 trillion, the lawmakers inserted an additional 4 billion naira for the welfare of members of the National Association of Resident Doctors who have threatened to go on strike. The House also approved a request by the President for the federal government to obtain external loans totaling over $5 billion US.
Attend.
let's get a sense of what this means and ask perhaps the man who took charge of the preparations of this revised document which was sent. Let's talk to the Director General of the Budget Office, Mr. Ben Akabweze. He's in our Abuja studio. Thank you so much, Mr. Akabweze, for your time tonight on the program, and it's good to see you today. Let's begin with what has come out from the House of Representatives today. They've raised it. You have asked for a drop in the figure, but they somehow had raised it, adding 4 billion naira for resident doctors' allowances. Let me get your quick reaction on that.
Well, I mean, we were aware of that. We attended a meeting yesterday summoned by the Right Honorable Speaker of the House of Representatives, at which this was, discussed, and at which the conclusion was reached that it was necessary so to do.
Okay, so what does this then mean? Because I understand that this wasn't coming from the executive. It was coming from the legislature. This was their own intervention in the situation at hand. So when I know there is being an issue about revenue, do we really have the money that was added? Can the executive live with what the House has passed?
Well, essentially, we're running a deficit budget, so this may simply add somewhat to the deficit, but you also note that the legislature had made some adjustment in approving the revised medium-term fiscal framework, and they had raised the benchmark price of crude from the $25 per barrel that the executive had proposed to $28 per barrel, but there was also a reduction in the production volume from 1.9 million barrels per day to 1.8 million barrels per day to reflect emerging realities in the global oil market. The net impact of that was incremental revenues of about 86 billion naira accruing to the federal government for its budget. And so that's part of what the legislature has also gone ahead to appropriate. Additionally, there was a 186.37 billion as part of the 500 billion naira COVID-19 intervention fund, which represents cost of interventions, across the states, which when we originally submitted the revised budget, we had deemed federation level expenditures rather than federal government expenditure. And so that was not captured in the federal government's own budget, but the legislature feels that it's more appropriate to capture that also in the federal government's budget. So that's been brought in there.
So because that's one part of it, because the reason why the Senate has not yet deferred presentation on the report was the details that they were asking from the Ministry of Budget and the Ministry of Finance and Budget and National Planning, the details of the 186 billion. They will consider it tomorrow. Has that details, do you know, Mr. Akabweze, if that details has been passed to the National Assembly?
The details had been passed to the National Assembly even before yesterday. There was a difference in opinion about how it should be treated, as I said earlier, whether it should be reflected in the federal government's budget or treated as a federation level expenditure. But as for the details have been with the National Assembly.
Mr. Akabweze, a lot of people will agree, and I probably also will agree with those who think that, look, for a moment, the business of preparing this budget might not be the easiest thing, but it might be the easiest in the thinking of how to implement it, isn't it, Mr. Akabweze? Especially when you have on your hands a dwindling revenue base, that headache is there, Mr. Kabweze. But how bad is that headache?
It's real bad. It's really bad. I mean, the net effect of all of the adjustments to revenue projections we've had to make is about a 3 trillion naira reduction in the revenues accruing to the federal government for 2020, and that's why you've seen that in the face of that we were faced with two choices, or let me say three choices, and it's important that I spend some time and talk about this, because a lot of people make this look like a very simplistic matter that is that cut and dry. Being faced with a 3 trillion naira shortfall in our projected revenues, what are the options you have? Option one is that you cut back on expenditure. Option two is that you keep the projected expenditure and look for revenue sources to new revenue sources to be able to make up the shortfall, which was coming mostly from declining projections for revenues from the oil sector. But as you know, the oil sector, there's a contagion effect when you have a decline in revenues from oil, which accounts for over 90% of our export earnings, of our foreign exchange earnings. It tends to also drag down other sectors. Trade volumes decline, and when trade volumes decline, customs revenues also decline. And as general transaction volumes decline, your taxes, VAT and other related transaction charges also decline. So the net effect was this 3 trillion. The third option is to sustain your planned expenditures and resort to borrowing. So let's look at each of those options. Option one, cut back expenditures. Number one, given the reality of our expenditure structure, that is not immediately feasible. To be able to achieve that, you would need to basically retrench personnel. So you can save on personnel costs, which is the single largest item in the budget. Personnel cost is about 3.7 trillion naira. So the question is, at a time like this, with employment soaring in the heels of the pandemic and an imminent recession, is this a time to retrench? What really can you cut? And so we tried to to cut costs, but as we cut some costs where we thought, especially expenditures that we thought could be deferred, without really, endangering the government or impairing growth, we also had to bring on board new expenditures related to the response, the public response to the COVID-19. So, for instance, we had to cut, but there's 500 billion naira of expenditure on the COVID-19 response, which has come on. So, therefore, this was not a problem you could address by simply cutting expenditures, as a lot of people seem to suggest. Option two.
Sorry, before you move to option two, I just wanted to
the gap.
Chip this in.
Yes.
Mr. Kabweze, before you go to option two, the president had said the Oronsaye report, talking about cutting costs on the civil service and the public service reforms. Isn't that going to help in terms of cutting costs?
Well, that will help, because that's what it's intended to do. But that doesn't give you immediate relief. Remember, the crux of the Oronsaye report is about, basically restructuring agencies of government, merging some of them, basically upping some that really, should really have reached sunset, basically just improving overall efficiencies of government. that's not something that's going to happen overnight. And the approval that the president has given is for the secretary to the government of the federation to lead the process, working with others, including the head of civil service and the entire service to, then, look at, how that report can be implemented. So that's not something that will give you immediate relief for 2020.
Let's, for a moment, Mr. Akabueze, I'll come back to you 1 minute. Let me bring in Mr. Johnson Chukwu, an economist and the MD of the Cowrie Asset Management Company. Thank you so much, Mr. Johnson Chukwu, for your time. If you look at it, you hear Mr. Akabueze. He's being blunt, he's being straightforward in his explanation about the situation that we are in. And if you look at this budget, what do you see? I hope a very difficult times ahead.
Thank you, Sheung, for having me. I was just listening to our pastor, Ben Akabueze. And he, like you rightly said, he was quite forthright on presenting the matter as it is, the challenge that the country faces today, that you really can't afford for the federal government to retrench at the time when the private sector is retrenching. So to cut down on some of the government overhead is going to be very difficult, particularly the personnel cost, which he put at about 3.7 trillion naira. But the challenge you are actually going to have in this budget is beyond the issue that we may not be able to cut down some of this expenditure. Is the revenue projections. And I looked at the revenue projections, I don't see how that will be achieved. The National Assembly has increased the benchmark to $28 per barrel. And we are also budgeting a volume production of about 1.8 million barrels per day. Even when you add condensates, you are not going to achieve 1.8 million barrels per day, given that we are complying with OPEC quota, which has capped our production about 1.41 million barrels per day. So in effect, you're going to have major challenge achieving the revenue projections. And if you fail to achieve the revenue projections, the deficit widens. And that means that even the effort of the government to fund that deficit from borrowing about $5.5 billion may not really close the gap that will be open because of the revenue shortfall we should expect. If you look at the projection of about over 5 trillion naira as revenue, last year when there was normalcy, our total revenue was just about 4 trillion naira. So I don't understand how the government will achieve a 5 trillion naira revenue projections. And if you have a major revenue shortfall, the budget may become unimplementable, or the government may really have to stretch the borrowing, and that will bring its own burdens to the economy. Today, our debt service is oscillating between 50 and 60%. If you look at the projection of about 5 trillion and the projected debt service about 4 trillion, that's something close to 75% to 80% of debt service to revenue. So that will pose a major challenge. And as long as we are unable to, provided we are able to achieve the budget revenue, then we may not have, then the budget may be implemented. But if that is not achieved, it becomes difficult for the government to implement the budget, because you have non-discretionary expenditure. He mentioned issues like debt service, issues like personnel costs, that if you sum up those two, you already have about 8 trillion naira expenditure the government must incur this year.
Mr. Chukwu, let's take a breather, but when we come back, we will ask Mr. Akabueze. He's also leading the planning ahead of not only now, but in the future, where people have said, we're going into recession. What are the plans of the Buhari government? Mr. Akabueze will be telling us the honest truth tonight on the program and what Nigerians should expect. That's going to be next. Join us again, everyone. Thank you so much, everyone, for staying with us. So basically, we're trying to make sense for you on what is happening as regarding the spendings by President Muhammadu Buhari and his team, the plan in the budget as passed today by the House, which of course we're expecting the decision of the Senate tomorrow. So the Director General of the Budget Office, Mr. Ben Akabueze, has been speaking to us on the program. What should we be expecting? Mr. Johnson Chukwu, an economist, also is weighing in on the matter. Well, as we round up this conversation with my two guests on this matter, is the future of the nation, the fortune of Nigeria, and as is being handled by President Buhari and his team. Mr. Akabueze, a quick one from you. There is a decision to cut production which is not our own fault because of what is happening generally due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the price of oil that has dropped again, worsening the situation. What we have then is the fact that we are entering into a more difficult situation in the future. Some have predicted that we might be entering into recession. But what is the plan of the Buhari government for this next year or end of this year?
Well, thank you, Sheung. Before I answer that, I just wanted to take a moment and speak to some of the budget credibility. That's how we, the technical term for it, questions that my brother Johnson raised concerning the revised budget. He was right in worrying about the revenue projections, and we too do worry. But let me say this: last year, the total federal government revenues was 4.6 trillion, not 4 trillion. And, this year, as I said, the revised projection says 5 trillion. But obviously, I'm not sure he's taken into account the impact of inflation, the impact of the exchange rate adjustment on revenues, the impact of a 50% upward revision in the VAT rate. So we think the revenue projections are realistic. It's not a walk in the park, but yes, all the revenue agencies are basically poised to try and grapple with the challenge. But the projections are not ab initio unrealistic. And debt service is not a trillion, but it's 2.7 trillion. And even if you add the 272 billion naira for retirement of bonds to contractors and whatever, it's still about 3 trillion. Still very high, and therefore we must work to grow revenues in future. And then that leads me to your question about what do we do to try and avert the recession or failing, being able to avert the recession, at least to make it a short one, a V-shaped recession where we dip and get right back up. That's exactly one of the reasons why the choice that was made by government in this situation was to keep spending up, because that's one of the things that governments do when you face the recession, is to keep spending, to keep public spending, up. And that's why, we've had to resort to, raising the level of borrowings. When we emerged from recession in 2017, the plan then was, recovery, then growth. And we had projected that deficits would start sliding and, revenues growing, the level of revenue initiatives that were in the pipeline. But when you're faced with imminent recession, it's not the time to embark on massive drive for revenues, even though you need to spend. And so invariably, you then resort to borrowing again in the short term. We're currently working on the new medium-term national development plan, 2021 to 2025. As you know, the economic recovery and growth plan was 2017 to 2020, and so its lifespan ends at the end of this year. And that is basically going to then, define how we go forward. Something that you can bet will be part of that is, diversification. That's been a critical issue of this economy. When you look at our GDP, the composition of our GDP, there are about 6 sectors that between them account for about 70% of GDP. And so you could be, even if you then said that the economy is reasonably diversified, but the problem is when you then come to government revenues, oil and gas, which is only 9.5% of GDP, now accounts for about 50% of revenues. It gets worse when it comes to export, earnings, to foreign exchange earnings. It's over 90%. And so the challenge going forward is how these other sectors of the economy, how they can be made to contribute more to, both government revenue generation and, export earnings. And so there's structural change that is required, in these other sectors. And that's the challenge of the,
all right. So, Mr. Akabueze,
the development challenge that we face, going forward.
All right. So, just in one sentence, would you say that this is perhaps going to be the most difficult period of the Buhari government in terms of economic handling?
I would agree with you, yes, because, yes, we faced a similar situation in 2015, 2016, but we had more fiscal buffers to help, contain the situation than we do now, and so that's basically, made this, really more difficult.
All right. Let's get Mr. Chukwu's reaction. Where do we go from here? We've heard from the government side. On the whole, Mr. Chukwu, what would you say the future holds?
Shane, I think it's going to be a challenging period, not just for Nigeria, for many countries. A lot will now depend on the policies of the government in coming out of this economic challenge. I heard Pastor Ben Akabueze say, look, we are targeting to have a V-shaped recession, so we can easily come out of recession within a short period of time. But that will depend on the policy of the government. It is good that the government has adopted expansionary fiscal policy to drive economic activities, but a lot will now depend where these monies are going into. If you look at the budget, most of the expenditure the government is budgeting this year is going to go into recurrent expenditure, debt service, personnel costs, overhead. The amount going into capital expenditure, which is what is required to stimulate economic recovery and economic rebound, is not so much. And like I mentioned earlier, though he had actually come to say that the revenue projections, they took into cognizance a lot of factors, and they believe it's realistic. I still feel it will be a challenge to achieve that revenue projection. And if we don't achieve that, remember that the capital expenditure component is what you call discretionary expenditure. The government will focus on paying salaries and wages, focus on meeting debt service obligations before they set aside the money for capital expenditure. And without spending on capital expenditure, you are not going to restructure the economy. You are not going to create an environment that will require that you achieve those value addition you need to diversify our foreign exchange earnings. So it's going to be a challenge, but I hope that the policies will be up to the task so that we can actually have a V-shape that we all wish. I mean, a V-shaped recession like we all wish.
Thank you so much, Mr. Johnson Chukwu. I must indeed say, what a difficult time to be a leader in any aspect of life, either as a leader of a family to earn a living for your family members, or even worst case scenario, to be the leader to handle the economy of a nation as Nigeria. Mr. Ben Akabueze, I wish you the very best, you and President Muhammadu Buhari, in handling the Nigeria's economy. Mr. Chukwu, thank you so much for your time. What a time in the lives of everyone. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your talk tonight. We will go into Edo governorship race and what is happening. But before we go there, I have one of the aspirants in our Abuja studio. But let me get you some other political stories that we have for you on our political roundup.
President Muhammadu Buhari has presided over this week's virtual Federal Executive Council meeting at the Presidential Villa in Abuja. The Vice President, Professor Yemi Oshibajo, the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Mr. Boss Mustafa, the National Security Advisor, Mr. Babagana Mongono, and the Chief of Staff to the President, Professor Ibrahim Gambari, and up to 10 ministers were present, while the remaining ministers joined the meeting from their respective offices. This is the fourth time the Federal Executive Council is meeting virtually since it resumed session following the outbreak of COVID-19. The Senate is enacting a critical legislation to protect victims of rape against any form of stigmatization in the country. The bill, which scaled second reading during Wednesday's plenary session, provides for the prosecution and punishment of any person or group of persons who stigmatizes such victims. Leading the debate on the bill, the sponsor of the legislation, Senator Mohammed Musa, says if passed into law, the bill would encourage victims of rape to testify in court and also ensure the reintegration of victims of insurgency into the community of their choice. Senator Musa says the condition most victims of of rape are exposed to are traumatic and blames this on what he describes as the ineptitude of the Nigerian justice system. Bauchi State Governor Bala Mohammed has inaugurated a 21-member committee saddled with the responsibility to work out modalities on how best to implement the Presidential Executive Order 10, which gives financial autonomy to state legislature and judiciary. The governor assures that he's in full support of autonomy for the two arms and ready to adopt the order while inaugurating the team chaired by the Secretary to the Bauchi State Government, Alhaji Sabiu Baba. Members of the committee have 4 weeks to study the order, identify challenges and opportunities, and advise government on implementation based on peculiarities of the state.
We in Bauchi, we are establishing a very serious synergy and exercising separation of powers between the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary.
The governor of Osun State, Mr. Gboyega Oyetola, has sworn in the chairman and members of the Osun State Independent Electoral Commission. The commission has Mr. Segun Oladiton as chairman. The governor says the constitution of the commission is in line with the provisions of the Constitution of the Conduct of Local Government Elections and other relevant activities as outlined by law.
Thank you so much, everyone, for staying with us. Let's get into mainstream politics. And it's going to be the politics of Edo State, precisely that of the APC. We understand that the screening process for the aspirants, 6 of them who are contesting for the ticket of the APC, is ongoing. One of those people who have gone through that process is my guest tonight on the program. You can see the list of those who are in the race for the APC ticket. Godwin Obaseki, the incumbent governor, Osageze Yamu Pius Odubu. Tonight, Chris Ogenwonyi, an engineer, joins me. Osaro Obaze is also one of them, Matthew Idiokirewe. Those are the 6. Let's speak with the former Minister of State for Works and a former group MD of the NNPC, former MD of the National Gas Company, Engineer Christopher Ogenwonyi, joins us from our Abuja studio. It's good to see you, Engineer Ogenwonyi, and thank you so much for your time tonight. What a time to be contesting for the ticket of your party. For someone who had run in the PDP before you defected and you came into the APC, you are a former minister under the PDP, but as it is right now, let me get your view on the screening process which you went through earlier today.
Good evening, Sheung. I'm happy I'm here to speak to you and to speak to Nigeria today, this evening. The process went well today. Before I left, about 3 of the aspirants, they've been screened today. So far, so well.
Is fair enough from all indication that you've seen?
Yes, so far so well. Basically, the process today was to look at the credentials of the aspirants. I, for one, they asked me, Chris, in your high school, you were Crystal. In your secondary school, Christopher. In the university, Chris. And I said the common thing here was my last name, Ogenwonyi. And the panel were convinced that this is the same person, beard, Christopher, Chris, something like that. But so far, I must have said, we were home with the panel. Yeah, so far they did a good job.
I mean, we've seen a lot of controversies trailing this process, and of course, you think your party is in a very bad shape going into an election?
I disagree with you, Sheung. APC is very strong. During your introduction, you mentioned I came from PDP to APC. Very true. The reason for that, I love the character of Mr. President. That was why I left PDP for APC, and I'm happy, and in fact happier to be in APC. For going forward into the election, I know one thing, that the APC is very, very prepared, and we will keep that seat in Edo State. APC will retain the governorship in Edo State. I'm very convinced.
Do you think that you can win the primaries?
You know, the way we are today, we have about 6 aspirants. Every one of us is capable of winning, and winning will depend on the people. The people have a choice, and that's the beauty of democracy.
But do you stand a chance, Engineer Ogewanyi?
Seun, if I ask you that question, what will you say? Looking at my background, a man that did 34 years in the public service, 1 year as a minister. If you know what they call me in the industry, oil and gas, they call me Mr. Local Content. Now I'm in politics. They call me Mr. Integrity. What is now a requirement in Nigerian politics is your character. With my background, what I traverse in the public service, with my character, with my empathy for people, I say I'm very sure I will win the primaries. Very sure.
All right, so we'll take a break, but when we come back, we'll be asking Engineer Ogewanyi some other critical questions as regarding the crisis in the APC, the primaries, the rule in Edo State by the government, and of course, the rift between Mr. Oshiomhole and Mr. Obaseki. Will that affect the chances of APC ahead of the election? We'll find out after this break, everyone. Join us again. Thank you so much, everyone, for staying with us. If you look at the profile of the 6 people who are jostling for the ticket of the APC in Edo State, you will agree with me that they are heavyweights in the race as far as politicians are concerned in the state. The oldest of the aspirants tonight is my guest, Engineer Chris Ogewanyi, a former minister in 2010. Is in our Abuja studio. Engineer Ogewanyi, as it stands right now, the rift between the national chairman of your party and the governor, what do you think that can do for those who think that is going to cause a damage to the chances of your party? Do you think so?
Seun, again, let me say, Mr. Governor Obaseki and the former governor, they are 2 in 1. And I see today there is becoming to see a reconciliation between the 2 of them. It's purely an in-house misunderstanding, and as we speak, we see moves. The 2 of them are gelling, and we are very sure before the conclusion of the primaries, the 2 of them will come to a point of compromise.
So, but for you, if there is because we understand that the national chairman supports the Osage Izeyamo. If that happens, would you be thinking that, what do you think that will be happening if they resolve their differences? Where does that leave you?
Seun, in politics, I've come to see so much of speculations. The national chairman is not supporting any aspirant. He is playing the role of a father to all, including the governor. We all met today. We shared jokes. We are still friends, and we remain friends. We are from one family. So, but people outside tend to blow things out of proportion, that there is a fracas between this and this. The national chairman is playing his role as the national chairman of the party. APC is not a local party. It's not a regional party. So Mr. National Chairman, Comrade Adam Oshimole, is playing the role of a father to all of us. And we are all glad to have him as our chairman.
So do you think that the governor is at fault in this matter?
It's not at fault. I told you just now, two of them are converging. Yes, very soon there will be a convergence between the two of them. There is no question at fault. After all, you see between the mouth and the tongue, they still, the teeth will still bite the tongue. But the essence of living is there is bound to be some misunderstanding. But the maturity is that eventually you still have to repair relationships. I keep on making reference to 2016, wherein Oshomole played a big role in the emergence of Gordon Obaseki. And Obaseki is a student of history. He's going to make sure all those disagreements, they are settled. And I'm so happy now he's speaking of reconciliation. And the current, the chairman is equally willing to accept the reconciliatory moves, which are ongoing. So we're coming to a point where the two of them will come to a good conclusion.
Engineer Christopher Ogenwanyi, one of the aspirants on the APC for Edo State governorship ticket. Thank you so much for talking to us tonight.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Let's speak to the electoral umpire, INEC, on the preparations ahead, because INEC has said, if you disrupt the exercise, we will cancel the election. We will not announce a winner. So what does this mean for the election, especially in the light of COVID-19? INEC has set out guidelines and rules on how to conduct these primaries. Yesterday, INEC gave a list of how the mode of primaries will be conducted across the political parties. I have joining me Mr. Festus Okoye, who is the National Commissioner in charge of publicity at INEC. Thank you so much indeed, Mr. Okoye, for your time tonight. So far, has it been good? Because we understand PDP has conducted their World Congress, which has led into the delegates that will go into that election. Did INEC monitor it? And so far, has it been good?
Well, all the 15 political parties that gave the indication that they are going to conduct party primaries gave us notice of intention to do so. And in accordance with our own extant rules, we are going to monitor all the party primary elections that will be conducted leading to this particular election. So we primed our office in Edo State and our national headquarters to monitor the conduct of those elections.
So in terms of preparations, because in Edo State, we understand that the government there is saying no political gathering more than 20 people. What does this mean for INEC, which has set out the guidelines? Will this in any way be in the way of conduct of any election if the state government says you cannot gather more than 20 people at a time?
Well, we have not reached that particular stage. We are now at the stage of the conduct of party primary elections. And as we are aware, by the provisions of Section 87 of the Electoral Act, the conduct of either direct or indirect primary elections is the exclusive responsibility of the various political parties. And we have 15 political parties that have indicated intention to sponsor candidates and conduct party primary elections. So when we get towards the period of elections, we are going to dialogue with all the relevant authorities and make sure that the atmosphere is conducive for the conduct of elections.
You released a statement yesterday, and in that statement, you were talking about the issue of the election in Bayelsa State and some of the prosecution that INEC has taken on. Tell us about that prosecution, because you were talking about the fact that you are not going to take things easy this time around as to those misbehaviors during the elections.
Well, one of the things that the East Commission has said, and it's really determined to do, is to see to the passage of the Electoral Offences Commission Bill and Tribunal, so that one agency will be charged with the duty of making arrests, carrying out investigation, and prosecuting electoral offenders. But in relation to some of these electoral offences that were committed during the 2019 elections and those that were committed during some of these off-season elections, the legal officers of the election in the various states are diligently prosecuting all those electoral offenders. And we are just being upfront in letting people in those states know that any individual that attempts to disrupt the process or any individual that interferes with the electoral process, that this present commission is determined to make sure that we break the cycle of impunity and prevent people from disrupting the electoral process.
And so because you made reference to cases of election in Kogi and Bayelsa states and about disorderly conduct and unlawful possession of ballot papers and permanent voter cards, what is the lesson out of those elections going into Edo and Ondo?
Well, the lesson is that we are going to take very stringent measures in protecting our ballot papers and our ballot boxes. And we're also going to make sure that we ramp up our engagement with the Interagency Consultative Committee on Election Security, so that all of us will be on the same page in terms of the type of security that will be provided in the state and also the nature of the challenges that we may likely face. So we are meeting. We just finished meeting with the Interagency Consultative Committee on Election Security, and by next week or so, we are going to meet again to map our strategies on how to approach the governorship elections. And the Commissioner of Police for Edo State did join the meeting of the Interagency Consultative Committee on Election Security, and he has given us a guide and an update on some of the challenges existing and the means and ways through which will address those challenges.
So as we close now, Mr. Okoye, INEC said after Kogi and Bayelsa election that it actually is ill to those two elections was security, that you have a major problem with security, and you came out to say that. So what are you doing differently to ensure that what you said was a problem? Because security is not in your hands. What have you devised to do differently this time around in Edo?
Well, we have done a postmortem of some of these off-season elections that we had with the with the security agencies, and all of them have given their perspective on what went wrong in certain areas. And we have noticed all those things, and we are determined to redress all those issues and then make sure that we are upfront in terms of providing a good environment for the conduct of elections. So anybody who thinks that he or she can disrupt the elections in Edo State will be taking a very, very big gamble, because we are determined to work collaboratively with the security agencies to protect voters and all law-abiding citizens of Edo State.
Mr. Festus Okoye, National Commissioner of INEC in charge of publicity and voter awareness, thank you so much indeed for your time tonight, and we wish you the very best in your preparations, and do help tell your colleagues and your friends at INEC to keep safe in the process.
Thank you.
But that's our show for tonight, everyone. Many thanks for watching. I'm Sean Okimbaloye. Bye-bye.